Welcome in to this edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, John McKechnie, with Mario Puig. Draft season is really starting to heat up. We're going to get into Mario's FSGA Best Ball draft from earlier this week. We also got some Scott Fishbowl updates. Mario's has kicked off earlier this week, and mine has progressed. We are into round 17 in mine, so a little update after last week's first 10 rounds breakdown. Let's get it on. Welcome back in. This is the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast brought to you by our friends over at Dynasty Owner. John McKechnie here with Mario Puig. As always, Mario, draft season really starting to heat up. You were able to participate in the FSGA Best Ball draft. FSGA is running a bunch of different events throughout the course of this week. I will be participating in the FSGA Futures and Props draft that takes place on Friday. That's a fun one.
Is that mix and match thing you were doing the last couple of years?
Yeah, so the essential breakdown of that is they give you a big board, based on, big futures, Super Bowl, AFC, even some college football stuff. I spent my first pick on the Georgia Bulldogs to win the Natty last year. Pretty sharp lad over here. But yeah, so that'll be fun. We can dive into that a little bit. Next week, we'll break that down, and maybe I'll pick your brain on some futures that I should be keeping an eye on for that one. I think, no spoilers, but spoiler, maybe some Chris Olave offensive rookie of the year discussion coming on that one. But I want to kick things off talking about your best ball draft. We'll get to Fishbowl in the second half of this pod. So without further ado, what was kind of the breakdown of this one? Where were you picking? What did you have any strategy in mind going into this one, or were you just going to kind of let the board fall? The floor is yours.
Well, this is a different best ball format than what I've been drafting in, which was underdog previously. There are 12 teams, half-point PPR, 3 receivers, important detail. This one was different in a few ways. It was 2 receivers, not 3. It's full point PPR, I'm pretty sure, and it's 14 teams instead of 12. So that's so many differences from what I'm used to that I didn't really try to put together a rigid plan in my head going in. I kind of I thought I should try to somehow acknowledge the fact that I just didn't actually know what was going to happen. So like, why bother trying to guess too much? I figured I should try to just kind of react best as I could to how things were developing, and with the exception of the wide receiver point being devalued, and 2 receivers instead of 3, I think might be pretty important, especially in this era of fantasy football. I mean, this era of the NFL more specifically. Like back in like the early 2000s, 2 receiver, 2 running back was the normal format, and it was standard scoring, not PPR, not half point PPR. So it kind of made me wonder if it was going to be almost a little bit of a sort of a flashback league, in that maybe running back production was more important than people generally draft like nowadays, or at least maybe wide receiver was less important. Because if you're only starting 2 and there's more productive receivers now than ever, then I thought, well, that's the position I should maybe cut it a little cheap, at least in the sense of drafting early. I ended up going with volume rather than expense there. So I knew I wanted to get higher point totals at quarterback, running back, and tight end than I'm normally aiming for, because I just think that receiver would have been the easiest one to nail. So I kind of took like a wide selection of my pet sleeper types rather than trying to keep up with the highest priced ones early on. By the way, I was at I think the 10th pick is where I started, where I went with Joe Mixon. But a lot of my targets from within this approach that I'm describing got sniped from me. So most of my picks were not my ideal ones. Like the Mixon one, I was probably, let me see, I'm trying to remember what I was hoping for. I was hoping to get Dalvin Cook at the Mixon pick. And then after I took Mixon, I was going into the second round hoping to get one of Nick Chubb, Saquon Barkley, or Aaron Jones, and they all went before that pick, which is not that I was depressed to make my Kyle Pitts selection there, but a lot of people thought that was a weird one.
Yeah, anytime that we have tons of ADP data, and yet still the person who takes Kyle Pitts always kind of like gets an eyebrow raised, because there's always, you know, 2 or 3 guys, I feel like people in any draft that are in on Kyle Pitts at cost, and then after that it's a bunch of fade. I'm not paying that price for one touchdown.
Yeah. Someone who was in the Zoom chat was actually just like, "What the hell?" And I was like, "Man, I'm right here." What are you?
I can see what you're saying.
Yeah. But no, I mean, it was. I know it wasn't a conventional pick. I'm okay with that. I just so the context here is, again, I wanted those 3 running backs, and my plan was hoping to get Darren Waller in the 4th. If all else being equal, I'd rather have Waller in the 4th than Pitts in the 2nd, you know. But those running back targets weren't options, so that's how I ended up with Mixon and Pitts rather than, like, you know, I guess what I should have done was just not take Mixon and go with Jones or Barkley, because I don't know, I don't even have Mixon that far ahead of those guys. I was trying to get security, and I thought, like, you know, he's getting the 20 carry, 3 catch workload and one of the highest scoring offenses. Maybe I should just take that and leave 2 maybe more injury prone guys like Jones and Barkley for the 2nd pick. But maybe I should have just took those 2 running backs. In any case, I am happy with the way my team turned out, but having to wait so long in between picks kind of gave me concerns that I maybe don't normally act on, and it kind of explains how I ended up with a team that doesn't look that much. I guess in some ways it looks like teams that I usually draft. Like, I have a bunch of Cordarrelle, a bunch of Juju Smith-Schuster, especially decent amount of. I have a lot of Albert Okwuegbunam. That's a later pick, but yeah, I don't have any mix-in teams even as far as I'm aware of before this one.
Sorry to cut you off, but Julia J wants to point out my mustache and its prowess. So, you know, not to spend too long on that, but needed to be acknowledged.
Even what is eternally true sometimes needs to be said again.
You know, reminded. You know, just a reestablishment, a refiguring. But yes, if you're watching on the YouTube, it's there. If you follow me on Twitter, yeah, I'd be posting about the stash. It's happening. However, Mario, before we dive a little bit deeper into your team, I just kind of wanted to like have some general comments. I thought that you know, and again, you know, the way that the league is set up, where you're only starting a handful of receivers, only 2 necessarily. You do kind of get a throwback vibe when it comes to how many running backs are going off the board and going off the board early. So I kind of wanted to draw your attention to the 2nd and 3rd rounds, where we started to see some guys that we normally see go much later in the drafts that we've been doing end up getting pushed up the board. And I wanted to start specifically with Zeke. I also wanted to get your thoughts on Kamara towards the end of the 2nd round, and then A.J. Dillon being a 3rd round selection also kind of caught my eye.
Yeah, so like you said, the running backs were inflated the whole way through the draft. I mean, I didn't expect it to be quite as much as it was, but I definitely went in knowing I wanted to get my running backs out of the way early, because I thought basically if I'm taking wide receivers early, if I'm going wide receiver heavy early on, then the running backs that I'm going to have to take later, they're, you know, the Ronald Jones types, whatever the 0 running back favored types are. It's like you're not going to get that discount that you normally do, that you normally factor into the calculation for that strategy. But B, you're going to have to roster some running backs later who are just zeros. Like some of these guys that are getting picked as so let me try to back up a bit. I went pretty thin at running back despite spending early at running back. I only picked 4. Maybe that was a mistake. I don't know. It's definitely playing it pretty close in week 10, because I ended up taking Breece Hall, who has the same week 10 bye week as Joe Mixon. But the thing is, a lot of people were taking running backs 5 and 6 that I just would not pick ever. Players that I don't even think are going to be on rosters. Some of them were fine, like getting a guy like this Cody Zeeb got Khalil Herbert as his running back 4 in something like, I don't know, this is like the 12th, 13th round, something like that. That's fine. That's like where Herbert usually goes. But then you got players like, I don't know, like Abram Smith, Devontae Booker, Tyler Beatty, no offense, Mike Davis, no offense, who aren't going to do anything at all. Kenyon Drake, who I'm not even convinced he's going to be on the Raiders, going in the same round as like Nico Collins. And so like I wanted to be the team picking the receivers in that range of the draft because I can see Nico Collins having a few decent games. I can see what are these? I'm trying to get my color, like KJ Hamler going toward the end of the draft. Like that's a guy that especially in best ball, I want players like him. If they're going in the same range as players like Keyshawn Vaughn and like Chris Carson, Marlon Mack, like these are guys that are going around players that I think could be viable wide receiver starters, and I don't even think they're going to do anything at running back. So I got out of the running back market the way I did partially because by the time I was able to look at a 5th running back, I was like, I don't want any of these guys ever. So yeah, I'm playing it kind of weird for me. I definitely don't do 4 running backs ever. Although part of the background there too is I wanted to get 3 defenses and 2 good kickers because we have to do kickers and defense in this format, and I knew I wanted to get ideally the highest point totals at those 2, and I actually am pretty sure I did. We can talk about that a little later, I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But circling back, Zeke is a second rounder, even in this format. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Ezekiel Elliott was not on my radar in the second round, in large part because I did think, him, Javonte Williams, Cam Akers, Dobbins, Connor, whatever, they're not meaningfully different to me. So I said, well, I'll take Pitts now because I don't think he's going to make it to my 3rd rounder. And I think Pitts is meaningfully different from, even as much as I like Waller, I wasn't ready to take him in the 3rd. So I took Pitts there, not liking the alternatives. Kamara is a tough one. I mean, I've said that I don't think he's going to play the whole season, and I guess I should say I don't know what's going on with that. I know he's going to miss time for it eventually. Apparently, there's some technicality about the way his court schedule is set up that he might get the suspension pushed into next year. In which case, I don't really know what to do about that because I know that a lot of the reasoning is based on the time of the trial. And the NFL does not need convictions to send down suspension punishments. I mean, Ezekiel Elliott didn't get charged with a crime, let alone convicted of one. So Kamara having footage of this, and the NFL fixers, the NFL investigators already know whatever happened. They don't need the courts to tell them. So it's up to them to kind of decide now how to balance, the questions of like the Saints and their ability to compete with one of the most popular players in the league, their best player. They have to balance that consideration in the interest of that ownership group, whatever, versus kind of the league image of them ostensibly having like any set of equally applied personal conduct policy, which they just don't have. Roger Goodell, the whole point of the NFL, the way it is structured, is that they are basically a collusion cartel that is ruled by just kind of like internal power dynamics that aren't subjected to outside laws or anything. Like they can just decide stuff as a group and they don't need any reason to do it. They don't need to follow any rules. And Roger Goodell just always represents a plurality interest of the owners. Whatever collection of the owners can dictate enough power to tell Goodell to do something as it pertains to their broader will, he executes it at that point. So whatever they want to do is what they're going to do. I don't think they need the courts to give them any sort of green light for anything, including this. But for what it's worth, this could be a case, I guess, where it's like maybe since he is one of the best players and since he is, the Saints really need him, maybe they will try to push the suspension into next year just so, I don't know, just out of the, sort of thinking of like just trying to make the next quarter as profitable as possible. Like maybe that's the way they'll do it. So all that's in play. I have no idea what's going on, but I know I just don't want to take Kamara because I don't know of what's going on, and I feel like I'd have to take him over other players who I'm just certain of.
Yeah, my sense, kind of going along with what you said. Do you remember the South Park episode where they ripped on Family Guy and their writing
the
process?
manatee selections?
Yeah, so that's basically how I view the NFL's process for deciding suspensions.
Well, it's even more bleak. Yeah, it's just organized crime. It's just mob stuff. It's like they get up there and they do what they want, and they'll be as corrupt as they want to, or as corrupt as they think they can get away with, and they can get away with basically anything. They're not governed by anybody but their owners, and the owners aren't governed by governments actually because they're too rich.
And manatees, famously not corrupt. Maybe the least corrupt animal.
Manatees are, along with they're the capybaras of the sea almost, I guess you say. As much as people say sea cows, like they are clearly conduits of like divine energy, and they are sea-based rather than swamp-based is the only difference, really.
Correct. But yes, but both animals we're huge fans of. But back to football momentarily, or right now. So let's go on over. I did want to touch on AJ Dillon. That I think is the highest that I've seen him go, like even in this type of format. So third rounder. I mean, again, best ball. I understand the idea of swinging for the fences a little bit harder, but I do feel like opportunity cost wise, like even if you're really aggressive on AJ Dillon, I felt that like maybe a fourth round selection would have, he would have still been there at that point as opposed to the third.
Yeah, I might have missed something. I'm not sure what people have been talking about with Dillon. Like usually when something like this happens, where some player movement in the ADP occurs, and I just don't understand it. Like it's usually some podcast or some collection of people on Twitter on some site kind of got an idea in motion, and people are going on Twitter and talking about it, and they kind of discuss it, and that's just how all the agendas kind of work through the public, and I'm guessing somebody out there said something about how AJ Dillon is, going to take a big step forward with Davante Adams gone, and maybe even take over for Aaron Jones. I'm not sure. I think we can say both of us were much higher on AJ Dillon as prospects than basically everybody. And I know PFF had him projected as an undrafted player, and like that was ridiculous at the time. And we were just saying it's as simple as 245 pounders who run the same 40 as Derrick Henry and have the same vertical and broad jump as Derrick Henry. They can probably run in the NFL. And Dillon can definitely run in the NFL. The problem is Aaron Jones can really, really run, and Aaron Jones can catch passes in the NFL too. Aaron Jones is as dangerous as all but probably like 3 or 4 running backs in the NFL in any given one play. I don't think there's a meaningful distinction between Kamara and Aaron Jones, honestly, as far as just kind of how dangerous they are. The only reason they don't keep up with players like Jonathan Taylor and Chubb is just because they're not as big. They can't take on quite the same beating. And that is a real limitation with Jones. He's not going to be a 20 carry running back. It's just out of the question. But even going back to UTEP, he was just insane, just no doubt productive all the time, every single year. And I think Jones is clearly the more likely beneficiary than Dillon for whatever there is to gain from Davante Adams leaving. And I think it's quite substantial what Jones stands to gain. I think Dillon can maybe gain a little, but to me, he's like their sixth man and maybe one who gets a bigger workload when it's really cold out and they basically want to, up the pain factor and reduce the contact that Jones is subjected to.
Right. And that's always been kind of like the great thing about the idea of AJ Dillon in Green Bay. And I know that AJ Dillon like has totally embraced the Wisconsin lifestyle. Like he's always tweeting about or like Instagramming about how much he loves Wisconsin and like goes up to Door County and stuff. So I personally, I love that kind of stuff. And I love the idea of a frosty game at Lambeau where he's just bludgeoning the opposing defense. So, that therein lies, some potential like, a playoff bump potentially when you get to the fantasy playoffs, you get to that stage of the season and like AJ Dillon just he gets on the tracks and look out. But
if Jones does miss any time, then Dillon goes nuts. But people are taking him, like the team that took him the round before Elijah Mitchell, who doesn't need anyone to get hurt to rake.
Yeah, see, exactly. So I thought that was interesting, and I think that was good to kind of like reset the record on Aaron Jones because I feel like the discourse on him has been rather tepid throughout this offseason, but I think that he's someone that I need to get some more shares of it as the rest of draft
really
season
good.
Kind of starts.
He could do exactly what Eckler did last year, basically. Yeah.
And that's a good thing. Let's get on over. Let's shift our focus to quarterbacks. You went ahead and took Justin Herbert in the fourth round. But that Josh Allen had gone the pick before, if I'm reading the board correctly. And there was, kind of some talk that this week ESPN goes ahead and releases their top 10 quarterback list.
So they
Notable
tried to
omission.
do the Weasley thing where they're saying it's actually these 50 people that we polled in the league, and we're just saying what they're saying. We're just saying, I'm just saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like but this is just what we're hearing. But I
Some
mean,
are saying, yeah.
But what are your thoughts there? Because I mean, you put some out there on Twitter as it pertains to Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. So just kind of
Right.
have at it.
So when I said Josh Allen is not better than Lamar Jackson, that is not the statement. Lamar Jackson is better than Josh Allen. We have a really bad literacy problem right now, and a lot of people just immediately ruined their pants over that misunderstanding. But then what I was also talking about was real life in that case. I wasn't talking about fantasy. In fantasy, I definitely prefer Josh Allen, and indeed with this 4th-round pick, I was hoping to get Josh Allen there. I had taken by this point Joe Mixon, Kyle Pitts, and Breece Hall. Quick rewind on Breece Hall. I was actually sniped there too. I shouldn't have expected it to work, but I was hoping to get ETN rather than Breece Hall. ETN went 3 picks before me, so I ended up with Hall, despite him having the same bye week as Mixon. In any case, I went in. I made that Hall pick, and I was like, man, hopefully Allen makes it to the next one. And I wasn't disappointed exactly to take Herbert there, but I knew at that point, having taken Pitts, I wasn't going to take Waller, who was probably the best value on the board at that point. So I thought, I either right here is where I take a receiver, and I didn't see any compelling. I guess the best one was, DK Metcalf was the next one taken, and I would have needed it to be like T. Higgins, AJ Brown, someone like that for me to take them over Herbert in this case, because I knew I'm going to be waiting a long time till my next pick, and I know I want to have, something like top 4, top 3 quarterback output. So I took Herbert, and I do have him behind Allen. It's not that I have them a 1A 1B kind of thing, but just the same, I'm not too sad about it. I think Herbert could be the quarterback 1 this year. I don't think that should be shocking to anybody if that happens, especially if they just do something as simple as signing Will Fuller or Julio Jones. I would really, really, in that case, I might actually make it more like a 1A 1B between Allen and Herbert. But yeah, I took Herbert, not so much because he's a 1B for me at the moment, as much as I didn't want to just assume I'd get that quarterback security, that quarterback upside that I wanted, waiting, whatever that would be, 25 picks or whatever it was. So I took Herbert there. To go back to Allen, though, the reason I said that he's not better than Lamar Jackson is that basically Josh Allen's the whole narrative around him, I think, has become a little blinkered, and even more so maybe around Lamar. Lamar Jackson won the MVP at 23 years old, and his wide receiver 1 that year was Willie Snead. So that I don't think I should need to say more than that. I don't think Lamar Jackson should ever have to justify himself again after that. And yet we've got all these people who are just going to, oh, it was a flash in the pan. Uh, how do you explain the league? How incompetent does the league describe itself to be if they're saying a 23-year-old quarterback who is basically average league wide put an MVP award on them? How do they explain that with Willie Snead as his number 1 receiver? They're saying that a 23-year-old average starting quarterback put an MVP award on them. If they believe he's average, and assuming they don't think Willie Snead is some kind of Megatron level talent, and maybe that's where the misunderstanding lies, they're guilty of like lacking object permanence or something. Like it's absurd to say that player can do that and be average. Unless you're saying that the entire league is run by incompetent, just imbeciles, and if they want to say that, they can, but they have to say that. They can't just say Lamar Jackson's average. We know what we're talking about otherwise, but yeah, we let the average 23-year-old just put us in a blender for an entire season. Yeah, right. Give me a break. So Josh Allen, in my opinion, cannot be considered better than Lamar Jackson, and I don't really take a position as to which might be better between the two. Like I don't even think I don't need to take a position on whether Lamar is better than Allen to say Allen at 23 years old would not have been able to win an MVP award with Willie Snead as wide receiver 1. And the reason we can say that is he didn't have any good seasons until Stephon Diggs, John Brown, Cole Beasley all got there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, at the very least, I would need to see Lamar Jackson play in an offense with a Stephon Diggs kind of wide receiver, ideally with a Brian Dable kind of play caller. By the way, Greg Roman is also a negative. There's another advantage that Allen had, an emphatic advantage. So yeah, with those things all being the case, I find it really obnoxious and infantile basically when people freak out about it. You can't say Lamar Jackson, or you can't say Josh Allen's not better than Lamar Jackson. You can't. You're still like impressed with peekaboo. Like you don't have object permanence. I don't know what to tell you. I can't talk to someone like this.
And, I think another thing, obviously I pay pretty close attention to the Ravens. I pay attention to everything, but the Ravens, watch them every single Sunday during the season. And, I thought going into last year, a question that I had about him was his ability to play from behind, because we had seen in the previous couple of years where the offense would fall apart, or he just like kind of would not play as well in less favorable scripts. And I think that, the way that the 2020 season bore out, or the 2019 postseason bore out, when they got behind, they struggled. And when Lamar was healthy last year, there were multiple double-digit comebacks, and you also can't rely on that. You don't want to be the team that is getting in the habit of falling behind by 2 scores, of course. And I don't think the Ravens are endeavoring to do that again this year. And if they have better injury luck, I don't think that they will.
Well,
But
John,
there's just always a moving of the goalposts when it comes to like, okay, well, he can't bring a team back, and then he does. He does it against the Chiefs. He does it against the Vikings. Does it against a handful of other squads. And then it Colts, again, the object permanence is just simply forgotten about.
Yeah, and John, so you were talking about how he made these comebacks last year, and that's of course interesting, specifically in the context of the main criticism previously being the opposite of that, basically that he couldn't do it. The reason that was happening was basically that the only time that they could produce last year was when they were trailing, because it was not until they were trailing in a game that Lamar Jackson would just stop playing the
Yeah.
offense. And Greg Roman's route combos would just go absolutely nowhere. The defense knows them before the snaps. They're not particularly novel to begin with. It's easy to figure them out. Lamar Jackson's been saying for years now that teams were just calling out their plays before the snap. That's still going to go on as long as Roman's there, by the way. But yeah, they'd start out the games for 3 quarters, especially the first quarter. The first quarter was always the worst with the Ravens. They might have been the worst first quarter offense in the entire league, in a league full of just unspeakably bad offenses. They somehow did the worst in the first quarter, and that's because that's when they were playing in the Greg Roman play script. And after 2 or 3 quarters of just going back to pass, never finding anything, throwing admittedly some risky passes to Mark Andrews, given how smothered all the other coverage was, what would happen is in the third quarter, usually Lamar would stop throwing that pass to Mark Andrews and run instead. And he'd make a few big plays in the ground game. And then the defense would have to adjust its coverage to spy better on the run. And then they'd start completing passes, but only out of the structure that Greg Roman would call in the game plan. So that's still going to be a problem in fantasy. It's the reason why I definitely would take, along with Stephon Diggs, it's the reason I would definitely take Josh Allen over Lamar Jackson. But in terms of real life, I think it's actually kind of comical to suggest that Josh Allen could play in that Greg Roman offense and still look anything like he does in Buffalo. It would be chaos.
See, all right, well said. I mean, I don't think that it's deniable. Like the way that Allen's first 2 seasons went, there'd be the flashes of what we've seen consistently now over the course of these last 2 years, but it'd be kind of anchored down, weighed down by the kind of rougher around the edges parts of his game that made us skeptical about how this whole thing with Josh Allen would work going into the draft. And obviously it's crazy how the way that that 2018 class has turned out, where 2 of the top 3 picks are already on their second teams. 2 of them are going to be competing against each other in Carolina for the starting job that this August, everything like that. It's crazy how it's all worked out. But that's besides the point here. When it comes to Lamar Jackson, his first season as a starter, he goes out and wins MVP. There was just no doubt as to who the most valuable player was that year, and he didn't have, like you said, the favorable surrounding conditions, and it didn't take him long to be able to put up that level of production.
Remember when
So
he beat the Rams in like 10 minutes?
that game was that Monday night game. I was home for Thanksgiving, got to watch it with my dad, and that was just an absolute melting of the Rams. I think that was kind of like the beginning of the end for
Yeah, I can't remember
Goff,
like a first quarter knockout, like a first
of
minute.
a good team.
Just they rang the bell and one of them was on the ground. Yeah.
It was that game. There were so many games like that in 2019. That was a fun time. Got a couple more comments in the chat here. Going back to the Pitts selection, why are you higher on Pitts than Andrews in best ball?
Well, I certainly like Andrews, and I do think he's going to basically be the wide receiver one for the Ravens, even over Rashad Bateman. But
Yep.
I think that I just think that his price, Andrews' price, and the projections most people are making draws too much from the sample with Tyler Huntley, and I think Tyler Huntley was throwing to Andrews for reasons that Lamar Jackson won't, namely that Huntley can't throw 10 yards. So if he's only throwing 8, he's only throwing to Andrews. And I think it was kind of as simple as that in that sample. So I think Andrews needs to have a season like last year to outscore Pitts safely this year. And I just don't think it's on the table. I think, that passing game, you would have thought based on Mark Andrews' numbers that Tyler Huntley was throwing for like 300 yards a game, but he was throwing for whatever Andrews was getting plus 25 yards to the rest of the team. The rest of the team is going to do more than 25 yards a game with Lamar Jackson at quarterback. And I just think there's a pretty good chance that Pitts is the top tight end overall, let alone ahead of Andrews.
Yeah, I'm in on Pitts this year. A colleague of ours and a listener of the show, Chris Owen, him and I were talking about a keeper conundrum that he had where it was he could keep Amon-Ra St. Brown as a 15th rounder or Pitts as a 5th. And I just felt like opportunity cost wise, like even though Pitts only goes 2 rounds higher than that, I just feel like Pitts ends up developing into something that's special. Whereas Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think he's going to be really good this year. I love him in PPR. I'm trying to get him everywhere that I could. I got him in the fishbowl, everything like that. But I just don't really see, especially once the Lions move on from Goff, him being more than, with like an Emmanuel Sanders type of career. Would that be like the high end of outcomes? Whereas and receivers is so much more replaceable. It's easier to find. When you have a truly great tight end, like if you've been keeping Travis Kelce for the last 7 years, and you've just never had to worry about tight end, and that's so crucially valuable. And I think Pitts could have something similar.
Yeah, I will say there's no way that keeping Pitts is going to hurt him, but I am glad that I didn't have to answer that one because, especially as I know I'm basically a Pitts super fan, so I'd be anxious about just being a total hack to say Pitts. Like maybe I'm just too much of a homer basically at this point. But I like St. Brown quite a bit too, and 15th is just so cheap.
Right.
It's crazy, but yeah, I mean Pitts. He only will be 22 in October. If he doesn't get hurt, he's going to put up by far the biggest numbers of any tight end ever. So if you can imagine it that way, then the 5th round price tag seems kind of flimsy in the face of it.
Yep, it does. So I advised going the Pitts route there. Let's see. And then one more before we kind of round out the best ball discussion here. What was your thinking there for either a Travis Etienne or a Breece Hall over Josh Jacobs? I guess with Jacobs, the positive that I can see with him is, they declined his 5th-year option. So there's a chance that they kind of run him into the ground. But I think that this becomes a more, pass-happy scheme this year in light of the additions that they have. Devontae Adams, you have Darren Waller hopefully being full go. I think, Hunter Renfrow is really developing into something as that third option in the passing game. So they're not going to need to run the ball that much. But I think that, they basically could kind of have the luxury, as it were, of when they are running the ball, it's going to Jacobs, and there's really no question about it. And again, dovetailing off of that, I don't think that Zamir White is necessarily going to eat off of Jacobs' plate as long as Jacobs is healthy. So volume, I think there is the driver for Jacobs, but I think I don't want to speak for you, but I go after upside, especially on some of these younger guys. And, for Brees, obviously he's a rookie. ETN, a de facto rookie after missing last season. I just think that the upper range of scenarios for them is really high, and I don't think the floor is all that low.
Yeah, so I like Jacobs enough, and I like Antonio Gibson, who also went in this round, or sorry, went after shortly after I took Brees Hall, but neither of them was really on my radar right there because I usually get them quite a bit later. I didn't adjust yet, I guess, I didn't realize yet just how inflated the running back market was. So I was surprised to see Jacobs and Gibson go so closely after. I would prefer Elijah Mitchell over both of them. The reason I would prefer Mitchell, ETN, and Brees Hall over Jacobs is not so much that I feel strongly about it as much as just I really like those guys as talents. And in ETN's case, it's very easy for me to imagine it because I just think he's a very unique running back talent. I think he can be the Austin Eckler, DeAndre Swift, maybe Aaron Jones, I guess, even a little bit. That kind of running back, but the most blue chip talented iteration of it yet. Like I think Travis Etienne, if he's not an all pro player, I'm going to be disappointed. So if I imagine him to be the same category of a player as Eckler and Swift, who, Eckler goes like top 6 often, Swift creeping into the first round, went in the first round in this one. I think ETN is actually one of the best profit opportunities in the ADP this year. So especially in PPR where it's easy to imagine him, I think catching something like 60, maybe even like 70 passes while probably giving you something like 200 carries for like 1,000 yards. I just think ETN's sick. Hall was a panic pick. He's probably my least favorite pick in the draft. I love him as a player, but yeah, admittedly, I don't know how he's going to catch more than like 40 passes, even though I think he can. I don't know how he's going to do that with Michael Carter there. So, yeah, I need Hall to get a bunch of 20 carry games, and that's not much better than what Jacobs and certainly Mitchell could have given me.
Well, obviously, after the news coming out of New York this weekend, we got to be really high on the Jets offense. Just, we got to recalibrate our entire thesis on the Jets offense after last weekend. It doesn't necessarily affect Brees Hall, but when teams are having to worry that much about Zach Wilson now,
Yeah, I don't know.
We don't have to hang out on that one too much.
I don't want this to spiral into the documentaries I've been watching. But,
that's on our Patreon. Okay, we'll save that for that one. Again, so let's go ahead. Any other kind of like parting shots on your team, the rest of your roster build, any like end game targets that the people need to know about?
Yeah, I don't know what I could have done differently, but I do basically regret ending up with the Hall pick there. Maybe I should have used that as an opportunity to really put the flag down and take Elijah Mitchell and piss everybody off like I did when I took Pitts the round earlier. But I like the way the team generally shaped up. I love Hall as a prospect, to be clear, and if I could just be assured a certain workload, I'd buy in because I think he's ready for it. I think he's really going to be good. But yeah, I ended up with Mixon, Hall, Cordarrelle Patterson, who I think everyone is basically being ridiculous about at this point, and Isaiah Spiller, who I think is going to get at least 150 carries this year. And if Eckler misses any time, maybe more, and maybe a large portion of that could be in the red zone. So I really like Spiller as the running back 4 with the skill sets of Mixon, Hall, and Patterson. We'll see if the scheduling and their team circumstances cooperate with that. I went cheap early on at receiver, like I said, and part of if I'm hoping that I win this with what I can point toward as a particularly nifty maneuver here by taking DeAndre Hopkins. And I knew from the 2 wide receiver detail going in, I was going to target Hopkins because I think it's easier to survive with Hopkins on your best ball team if you only have to start 2 receivers rather than 3. So I'm hoping that my ragtag bunch of other receivers can get me, those first 6 weeks in a high ranking. And then hopefully Hopkins comes in and just works as a closer for me for the last 10 weeks. And Juju Smith-Schuster, Mecole Hardman, I have that tandem, hoping that, kind of hitching my wagon to Patrick Mahomes and
terrible idea. How could you
Yeah,
do that?
hopefully it pays off. We'll see. And I got AJ Green with my last pick to hopefully subsidize those first 6 weeks without Hopkins a little bit.
I really like how you went with the cheaper receiver build, but like there's a lot of like good like correlation, but between it all, like you're getting, one of the two best or potentially the two top performing non-Travis Kelce options in the Patrick Mahomes offense. And then, like you said, AJ Green, especially as a last round selection, I think that's awesome. And he's obviously going to get a little bit more run in that early part of the season while Hopkins is suspended. So I like the way you finished that one out. I thought that was an interesting build that you came up with. And then, you got two of the best kickers as well, and Daniel Carlson and Kick Fearson. So that's looking good. I think the Ravens defense bounces back this year. So I like the investment there.
Yeah, I took John. I took 3 defenses. Maybe this was stupid, but in best ball tens, it's often very good to get 3 defenses just because you're kind of pinching a lot of teams, getting the depth that they wanted, and you're basically locking in a top 5 type defense score every single week. So, especially in a 17-week season, I'm hoping that me having the highest kicker score, which I'd be shocked if I don't have it, with Daniel Carlson and Evan McPherson, and then 3 defenses, all of which I consider to be quite good. I'm hoping easy first place at kicker and defense. Like top 3 at tight end. Actually, give me first at tight end. I have Pitts
Yeah,
and
come
I have
on now.
Okwegwunum and Pitts. That's a first. Probably around top 5 at quarterback, and then running back, receiver. We'll see. It's sketchier there, admittedly, but I think I might have threaded the needle. It's a narrow path that you have to walk with a 14 team league like this, and I'm happy enough with what I had here.
I'm a believer. So I think you represented RotoWire very well in this draft, and I hope to do the same in the futures and props draft later in this week. Before we get on to the next topic, which is talking about my team from the Scott Fish Bowl, we're going to go ahead, take a couple messages from our friends over at Blue Wire, and a message from our friends over at Dynasty Owner. Do you love fantasy sports? Are you ready for a new challenge this year? Dynasty Owner is the new way to play fantasy football with real NFL salaries, adding the strategy of running an actual franchise. Dynasty Owner provides a unique and challenging experience that will test your skills as an owner and general manager. You will have complete control over your team's future. You can build through the draft, make trades, sign free agents, and manage your team's salary cap. Can you create a dynasty of champions? Sign up now at dynastyowner.com and use promo code ROTO5, that's ROTO5, to receive $5 off any new team. Again, that's ROTO5, ROTO5. All right, so as we discussed a bit last week, had the opening stanza of the Scott Fish Bowl Atlanta division. Atlanta 2, I believe, is the one that I'm in for those keeping score at home, of course. So we got through the first 10 rounds. I was fairly light on running back. I have 2 in the top 6 rounds. I had Chubb and Mitchell, but I knew coming out of the break when things started back up on Monday that I wanted to go ahead and grab a couple of running backs early on. So I went ahead, took Michael Carter with my first pick in the 11th, with my pick in the 11th round. So that was the first pick coming out of the break. 2 rounds later, I went ahead and nabbed Rachaad White. I find myself having a decent amount of Rachaad White thus far, and I got Khalil Herbert in the 15th round. I do like Khalil Herbert. So those are the 3 running backs that I've gone ahead and targeted. Got Marcus Mariota as my QB3 in the 12th. And then I think I do really like how the receivers shook out for me as well, because I was very happy with how things went in the first 10 rounds with Jalen Waddle, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Elijah Moore, and Chris Olave. But getting Rondale Moore in the 14th felt like stealing. And Jamison Crowder, not someone that I had any shares of previously, but the way that the receiver board had shaken out, and maybe this kind of helped me avoid an error, because I think earlier, like shortly after the draft, I was kind of like maybe going over my skis on an Alec Pierce. I would have considered him had he been available instead of Jamison Crowder. KJ Osborne, same deal, although I might still have taken Osborne if given that same coin flip. But Crowder, I do like. So let's talk about those receivers first. Starting out with your thoughts on Rondale, especially that late, and then Jamison Crowder.
Yeah, I really like getting Rondale that late. I look at the board, and there's definitely a handful of receivers who went ahead of him, in some cases by multiple rounds, who I don't think are going to sniff the point total that he puts up this year. So I guess I can understand some of the concerns people have with Moore, given that he basically just got handoffs last year. But that was pretty regular usage he got. Like, they were always putting him in the game plan, and it's not that uncommon, especially when you're talking about an underclassman receiver. It's not that uncommon for a coach to sort of just decide going into the year, we're only going to give him this much to do, and we're not going to revisit it until next year. Like, sometimes they just put players on diet plans like that, right or wrong. It does happen. And I, even as a person who was I'd say I was an optimistic agnostic on Moore, something like that. Like, I didn't want to rule him out just because he was small, but I didn't want to assume it'd just be as easy to get him going like it was at Purdue, where he was such a monster, of course. But even as someone who had some concerns, I don't think last year adds up as like a reason to reinforce that concern. Like, it seems to me like it was just Cliff Kingsbury doing goofy stuff, basically. And I don't think it means anything necessarily. But them showing the intention of having him regularly involved, even if it's in this like gadget role, that their insistence on always having that part of the game plan, I think, is encouraging, especially in light of the DeAndre Hopkins suspension. I am concerned about Marquise Brown sort of getting in the way in the slot. It would be a new thing for Kingsbury to have a player like Marquise Brown or Rondale Moore lining up outside. It's always Antoine Wesley or AJ Green, bigger receivers. So I'm a little worried about Brown getting in the way, but if they just run, especially with Zach Ertz running in the slot so much, I'm worried about that. But if they change up the policy and have like Marquise Brown lining up outside or Rondale Moore lining up outside, that's the way he raises his ADOT by like 2.5 yards right there. And with that, I think you're already talking about an 800-yard range sort of output. So especially in best ball, where you don't have to know ahead of time when they're going to really, maybe this will be the week they, show a flea flicker or something for the first time in 25 games. And if they do, there's no way the defense is going to be ready for it. And little stuff like that, I think, is a few, like 3 or 4 big touchdown plays from Moore is enough to make him a really clear profit, I think, especially at this price. I was going to say, he usually goes earlier than that, I feel like he usually, I don't know. I would take him over someone like Jameson Williams, for instance, who went a full 2 rounds ahead of him here.
Right, and we're JMO guys, but just
right. Next
Goff,
year, and with a
injury.
different quarterback, and when Chark isn't there,
then we'll jump in. But and I think with Moore, what's interesting is I felt like he had such like a giant hive going into his rookie year.
I had to talk against him last year because people were taking him over Kirk, and I was like, well, don't do that.
Yeah,
and now it's like, where's that squad they're missing?
It's crickets. They've gone underground. They're recalibrating their plans. I don't really know exactly what they're going to come up with, but Rondale
lost the faith.
I mean, when he's healthy, he's electric. He's obviously not a conventional guy. He's really, a short receiver by conventional NFL standards, but the play strength for his size, the explosiveness, like if
it was effective too.
Yes.
I know the numbers look so deformed that it's hard to figure out what they mean. I know a lot of people are looking at, 54 catches for 435 yards. What the hell? That's 8.1 yards per catch. How bad must you be to get 8.1 yards per catch? Well, it's actually pretty good when your average depth of target is 1.3 yards. He has to average 8.2 yards after the catch per catch, which is to say, every time he gets the ball, the defense probably already had an idea it was going to him, and there's probably 6 players immediately surrounding him, and he still somehow has some means of getting past 8 yards, even when everybody's gunning for him, like right after the snap. So if Cliff just adds a second move, just have a couple double moves in week 1 off of those same screen-looking looks that they had for him this year, and the whole defense will bite on it.
Yes. So again, you get the baked in, no Hopkins for 6 weeks, but maybe somehow, some way that target share gets a little bit driven up for Rondale. If he can have some of those big weeks, early on in the season, then we're in good shape. Although who knows if I'll have the cojones to start him or when exactly. But I'll
Redraft,
try
it's a
to
little
figure a way.
tougher, yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing is, a fishbowl, you start a bunch of players, so I think
Right.
in this format, he's clearly good.
I agree, and I like the value. Julia has a question. John and Mario, both of you drafted Albert Okwuegbunam. Can you sell me on Albert O, both in Scott Fishbowl and in Best Ball?
Yeah, it is crowded there for sure. I mean, even Hamler, Tim Patrick, those aren't the first names that come up. It's Judy and Sutton, so there's depth there to contend with, and it's not obvious how it would happen. But the reason I'm really optimistic for Okwuegbunam is I just think his price hasn't caught up. Like however much risk he might have, I think his cost acts like there's more than what there is actually reason to believe and undersells his upside. And the upside, granted, might require an injury or two to someone else, but it might not. And the reason it might not is it specifically comes up when you start to imagine the way Russell Wilson fits into the scheme. The way he tended to play it at Seattle was he would have his biggest plays, his most memorable moments were throwing downfield and be it the sideline or down the seam. It was usually someplace downfield. He didn't so easily get the ball to the middle of the field underneath or even in the intermediate. Maybe it's because of his height, maybe because of something else going on there for some reason that I'll never figure out. I don't know. But whatever the reason, he didn't really throw to the middle of the field in the intermediate or underneath. So if Jerry Jeudy's running a 5-yard slant and Russell Wilson only hits it at 80% the frequency that another quarterback would, then maybe that pass isn't going to Jeudy at all. And if it's not going to Jeudy, and if it's going downfield, then there's only two players who actually, in the middle of the field anyway, project for usage there. Okwuegbunam is one candidate. KJ Hamler is the other. And KJ Hamler is the one you can more easily imagine between him and Jeudy running those Tyler Lockett, 30-yard post routes. That suits Hamler and Okwuegbunam better than it does Jeudy. Jeudy is a tiny bit faster than Okwuegbunam. I think he ran a 4.45 compared to Okwuegbunam's 4.49. But
The
Okwuegbunam
size difference is crazy.
6'5", 258, running that 4.49. If you're a safety, then you're going to have to defend this, play action 30-yard post route possibility. You much rather see Jerry Jeudy because, maybe he's a little faster than Okwuegbunam, but just get a hand on him, trip him up. If Okwuegbunam's moving full speed and you're a safety, you're not really liking the way that looks. You're thinking about business decisions. You're thinking, oh my God, how is he moving that fast? He looks too big to be doing this. And he is. It won't help them. And I think Russell Wilson, it'll be interesting, I think, to see if they have it occur to them to try those Tyler Lockett routes with a 6'5", 258 guy. It could be very explosive because there aren't safeties who can run with that and without giving up, just huge box out radius.
And for me, what is the convention when it comes to tight ends? It's avoid them earlier in their careers, but when you have someone that's as talented as Okwuegbunam that hasn't broken out yet, now he gets Russell Wilson in the mix. I think that this is the year to time it up for Alberto's breakout. I think it's coming, and like you said, it is crowded. No one's denying that, and the guys on the periphery, like your Tim Patricks, like your KJ Hamlers, that's going to, potentially eat into some of that share. But, for instance, and I think that Alberto, to be clear, is a better prospect than this player was, but almost equal levels of unexpected breakout. Wasn't it real crowded in Dallas last year? And then what happened? Dalton Schultz still ended up. I mean, it's not the cleanest comp, but
he's just kind of getting empty calorie numbers. He's he wouldn't even start for a lot of teams, but Okwuegbunam I think sooner fits into the category of Darren Waller and George Kittle when you're talking about these really athletic late round tight ends, the kinds who we think back in recent years and really had a lot to do with the final rankings, the way people finished in their fantasy leagues. You had Waller that one year, you were in good shape. If you have Kittle the year he broke out, you're in good shape. He was going the 10th, 12th round. The thing they have in common is Kittle is an athletic freak. Darren Waller is an athletic freak. Albert Okwuegbunam, I keep mentioning this, the only players in NFL Combine history who had who weighed 258 pounds and ran a 40-yard dash under 4.5, were Okwuegbunam and 3 other first-round defensive ends, Montez Sweat, Dwight Freeney, and Brian Scott. So the level of athletic, like he's just like a singular athlete. And he's on a per-play basis already been very productive. What just hasn't been there is the snap count. So if he's playing 750, 800 snaps, I think he's got a really good shot at 100 targets. And I think he's probably going to have the highest yards per target on – I guess it depends on where they deploy him. They could use him the wrong way and give him if they run a bunch of like Bruce Arians crap, like giving him 4-yard curls, 4-yard flats, things like that don't suit him. But if they get him moving, I mean, he's just a train at a certain point. It's so much mass moving so fast. And he's going cheap. He's in that like 12th round, 13th round range. That's where Kittle was going, and Waller was going cheaper yet. But I'm just chasing, the skill set's been demonstrated with the per target, the per snap numbers already. He was already a good player at Missouri too.
Yes,
and he's a freak athlete by any measure. So when the alternatives are guys who, it's like not to bash Cole Kmet or whatever else is available there, but Okwuegbunam is the only one in that group who can peel off an 80-yard touchdown, and he's the only one in that group who's playing with a quarterback that we might bet on having 35-plus touchdowns.
Yeah, and Julia sums it up, fairly well. We're expecting the snap count to go up. The question is, how much do the targets go up?
Well, Albert's been I just saw Julia's comment. Albert's been rapidly targeted on the snaps that he's played. So the snaps is sooner a question, I think, than the targets, and I don't see how the snaps are going to be low because Dulcich, he's basically a different position, and whatever game they want to play with him, Okwuegbunam can play better. So I don't think he plays fewer than 700 snaps unless he gets hurt.
Yeah, I'm in on him. I have him. If I'm looking at my exposures so far on Best Ball, I think I have Alberto on probably about 80% thus far, plus the fishbowl. And you know what? I'm just going to keep going after
He's so cheap. You can diversify in the form of just getting him as a tight end too once in a while. It's it's. Evan Ingram is the other one. He's not quite the caliber of athlete. He ran a 4.42 at like 235, but he's also even cheaper yet. So I basically just have teams with Kelsey, Pitts, Waller, or I have Okwuegbunam and Ingram.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So those are the Mario tight ends du jour for 2022 thus far. Julia wants to know, when it comes to my fishbowl team, why I went with Mariota as opposed to Trubisky or Baker. I have to imagine that even though I think Trubisky starts the year over Pickett, that Mariota has the longer leash on Ritter than Trubisky does on Pickett. I think Pickett, by virtue of being that first round guy, I think Trubisky, if he starts to struggle, then I think that the Steelers pull the plug rather quickly. Whereas Mariota, I know that the Falcons aren't married to him either. I'll be surprised if he's starting all 17 games for the Falcons this year, but I like the setup. I don't think he's done just yet. I think he's a mobile guy. Maybe can give me some, rushing production here and there when I need it from the quarterback spot. So obviously Baker is not offering that either. I'm just kind of not really touching Carolina with a 10-foot pole. So I prefer Mariota over him straight up for this year. Trubisky is an interesting question. I will admit that. And I think that Pittsburgh has a much better offense. I think it has a much better, top to bottom, pass catching depth.
Year too.
Yeah. So there's that. But I just felt like Trubisky's leash being a little bit shorter, and the fact that did I have another Falcon on my team already? No, but I might be targeting another certain Falcon later. I'm not going to give away the spoilers to my league mates.
I just think Mariota's better than those guys and has a better situation. I mean, this situation with the Falcons, even though it's not great, it's still better than the one that he had the last time he was starting with the Titans, which is they had A.J. Brown playing behind Tajay Sharp, and then they benched Mariota and put A.J. Brown in the starting lineup. Now he has Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Brian Edwards is way better than Tajay Sharp. So this is, I think, when you throw in Arthur Smith being, in my opinion, clearly a top 5 offensive coordinator, I actually love the Falcons offense for the price this year. At least I have a lot of, obviously, Pitts, a lot of Mariota, and I'm pretty high on Cordero.
So does Mariota, was he there when Arthur Smith was there? Is that correct from
He
2019?
Yeah, he got benched, but I mean, it's hard to tell what was Arthur Smith and what was Mike Vrabel. I mean, once Arthur Smith got to the Falcons, he started running things a little differently. They weren't doing any Cordarrelle Patterson thing in the Titans offense. Not that they necessarily had the option, but Arthur Smith has shown an ability to just put together almost any kind of offense that he needs to. And with Mariota's running ability, with Pitts, with London, as long as that right guard, Jalen Mayfield, and that right tackle, Caleb McGarry, don't tank the entire offense, which they could, but that's the only way I see it aside from a Mariota injury. And if he doesn't get hurt, he's one of the best values this year, clearly, I think.
There we go. So, and again, fairly low risk as a QB3. I kind of, cinched up my quarterback situation, at least by my opinion, in the first 4 rounds. And I thought that he was a nice little, we'll see if we can get anything out of this one as my QB3. So I was totally happy to take the plunge there. I think the Falcons, at least offensively, hopefully could be a little bit more interesting this year than it was a year ago, even though, like you said, there were some interesting nuggets, some interesting details from the Falcons last year. Now we're entering year 2 with Arthur Smith. Anything else to add before we roll, Mario?
Not really. I guess, I hope I win this best ball thing. I didn't realize there was a $50 entry fee, but now that we're doing that, I care much more than most of our radio league type stuff. No offense to the other ones.
So there is that. Once again, thanks everyone for tuning in on the YouTube. Always some good discussion there. So if you haven't caught our live streams, we usually go live around 12:30 in the afternoon Eastern time on Wednesdays. If you want to jump in on the conversation on that, that's always a lot of fun. But if not, of course, you can catch the audio version of this via podcast wherever you catch your podcasts. But that's going to do it for us here on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, again brought to you by our friends over at Dynasty Owner. For Mario Puig, I'm John McKechnie. Thanks for listening.
Try RotoWire today, free for 10 days. Get our premium tools, rankings, analysis, and breaking news alerts. No credit card required. Go to rotowire.com/try.